So, but
Video?
but in the area that we lived, there was, gee, I can't even remember, there were grocery stores there. That must have been a couple, 3 blocks away. And
And you walked and you carried.
I didn't do much. back
Oh,
in
your
those
father
days.
did then.
Either that my father or my mother did the shopping.
My dad used to do all the shopping because he was a restaurant owner.
And how far were these shops away from your house, Nancee, and how did
Oh,
you get there?
they're in San Francisco and in LA. Not San Francisco, Oakland and San Francisco. They were local grocery stores, small ones, and they'd be within walking distance of anybody, you know. So I never rode anything to go to a restaurant or to a market because it just never occurred to me that we should be
No.
able to go. like
You didn't
that.
have to.
I didn't have to, yeah. Because you just said, oh, I gotta go to the store. That's about it. And, oh. And I used to go shopping a lot because I was the only one around sometimes. But when my dad and mother got old, so we just did what we had to do. We were not the richest people in town, but we weren't the poorest either. And so, but my mother sent me to Japanese school, like Chinese school, and, you know, we went to church and things like that, but I never thought I was poor. Luckily.
We're talking about the grocery stores and things like that.
Huh?
Talking about where you went shopping for food.
You just a regular shopping. So they had no big supermarkets or anything in those days.
Yeah.
And they had usually if it was it's like a small place that had a meat counter and fish market and not much else, and a regular grocery store. So, and after we had the restaurant, I didn't have to shop because my dad used to shop. But I guess I should have. And my girlfriends also did. What do you call that? What you used to do? Schoolboy?
Schoolgirl.
Oh, they were schoolgirls. And, then I had, all these sisters older than I, and a lot of them lived in at these homes. So our house was unlimited as to who was going to go to the store or what. But I didn't think anything of it. I thought everybody lived life. and if my mom said go get something, you went. Pop said, or go to the fish market. But he usually liked to go by himself because he liked to look at the fish and stuff. But it's such a different life from what I know. Then I guess, was it there that my mother got killed in San Francisco? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
She got off a bus and the bus killed her. That just she got off of. Huh?
It's a different subject.
Yeah, but I mean, it affected me in a way that,
That was after we were married.
No, you were with me like that when I was.
No, your mother got killed before she saw Darren.
What do you mean, before she saw Darren?
You know, she was going to come down to see Darren, our oldest son, when she was killed.
Darren's her child.
What?
What do you mean she was coming to see Darren?
Our Darren.
Or she was coming to see our child?
Yeah, right. When she was killed. So your timeline is way off.
Oh, yeah. Everything runs together.
Did you get along with your neighbors and the community?
Yeah.
Yeah, generally speaking, we did,
Let's jump to Boyle Heights. How was that like?
When you lived at Boyle Heights?
Yeah, Boyle Heights was a pretty diverse area, Everybody that lived there were different races and...
Can you explain? What kind of race?
Well, in the Boyle Heights area, there were Jewish people there were Mexican people there, Japanese people, Chinese people, Russian people.
Did you have a lot of Japanese neighbors?
Yeah, we had... I used to mostly play with the Japanese kids. Matter of fact, there weren't too many white people there. Yeah, the owner of our house was a white person and older person, but every once in a while I used to play with him. Turns out that when I was much younger, I was riding on his shoulder, and he was skating, and he fell down, and I fell down off of his shoulder and broke my leg. But we used to hang out together. He was old, like I say, he was older, but he didn't have anybody to play with, so he played with us.
Now, exactly what year was this in Boyle Heights? And how old were you?
16?
No, 1936 or 7. I was maybe 6 or 7
How old
when
were
that
you?
incident took place.
And you lived there again after the war, right? Boyle Heights?
Yeah, but not in the same area,
Right.
We went to Boyle Heights again, but when we went back to Boyle Heights, I was much older. I was must have been 17, 18 back in those days.
Do you remember what street your house was on?
Yeah, before the war, the street was Dakota, Dacotah Street. And after the war, when we went back eventually to Boyle Heights, it was on 3rd Street.
Can you describe what the neighborhood looked like on 3rd Street after the war?
We lived in an apartment, a two-story. We lived on the upper floor, and I guess most of the people in that area at that time were Mexicans. And I was going to school most of the time, so I didn't see the people around there. Neighbors across the street were Japanese, and we became friends.
With the Japanese neighbors?
Yeah. It turned out it was a girl. And I guess she was going to school at the time, so we learned and we knew each other.
And Nancee, when did you start to live in the San Gabriel Valley area?
After I married him, right?
Yeah, we moved here to San Gabriel in 1963.
Which city specifically?
Covina. And of course, by that time I was working at Aerojet. And
Wasn't I working then too?
no, after we moved here, you never worked. You were a home person.
When did I ever work?
But, you know, I used to live in LA, and to have to come all the way to Azusa to work was a little bit far, so we eventually moved out here to Covina. And let's see, 63, we had 3 children before then, before we moved out here. And then the rest of the 7 kids came after we moved out here. And our neighbors were white people. Didn't have any kind of a problem with them. And we moved in after a number of incidents took place with regards to discrimination and not wanting to have Japanese neighbors. Okay.
Can you elaborate on that?
Like that lady up there, Marvel Miyata, when she moved into Covina, she had, not Covina, she was, I guess it was West Covina, but she had a lot of difficulty with moving into her neighborhood. People were just totally against it. And so they resorted to having somebody else buy the property, and then they took over the property. But, you know, she was involved in pretty severe discrimination incidents.
Can you describe an instance where you were racially discriminated against?
Yeah, I can describe some incidents. Before the war, I didn't really have any kind of a problem because most of my acquaintances and people that I played around with were in that diverse neighborhood, and nobody worried about what race you were. But most of the people that I hung out with at the time was Japanese. But interestingly enough, I was in junior high at the time, and war started in December, and I was just a 7th grader at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden,
You were the enemy?
I was a Jap. You know, didn't know what the hell it really meant, but I was a Jap and an enemy. So that was when I first started to find out about discrimination. And so that was in 1941, late 1941, and we went to camp in the middle of 1942. So I didn't really have any kind of experiences subsequent to that. You know, we were all Japanese in camp. After the war, there were some places where I lived, like in the rough areas of LA, where people would just call me a Jap on the street.
Where in LA?
Huh?
Where in LA?
In the Skid Row district of LA. Back then it wasn't really a Skid Row, because it was just a regular street, but there used to be a hotel near where we lived, and people coming out of the hotel every once in a while, I'd find somebody that I'd meet or pass by on the street who would call me a Jap. And but subsequent to that time, I really didn't have any real experiences of discrimination as such. Went through school and everything and without any problems. It's kind of interesting that when I started to work as an engineer, I'd take trips to the southern states, and people would look at me and say, "Where did you learn to speak English? You speak it so well." But that was kind of common in a lot of areas.
Because a Jap's a Jap.
No, they couldn't figure out, they looked at me and figured that I was born someplace else and that I wouldn't be able to speak very well, You may have run across that same kind of situation yourself. But I've run across that situation on several occasions, and I'm talking about people that were intelligent people talking to me this way. That's probably not discrimination as such, but, they obviously see you as somebody different.
When you were younger, did these words ever go past as words? They ever become physical?
No, never physical. I just, those situations where that kind of said to me, I just ignored it, There weren't too many instances where I was called a Jap, And even in the service, I had no problems. I guess I was one of the few Japanese that joined the Navy. I volunteered for the Navy. And there were a few people in before me, but not too many. And I think at one time the Navy may have discriminated against having an Asian in the forces. But I didn't really have a heck of a lot of opportunities or instances in which I was singled out and with prejudice.
What about you, Nancee? Did you experience any racial discriminations when you lived here in the San Gabriel Valley?
Not really,
Not here in the valley, no.
not here in the valley. I don't think I had much. Well, when I lived in San Francisco and Oakland, I hung around with Chinese kids, so I never really had anyone think that I was anything but Chinese. And so that was easy for them. But I guess when I worked in I worked for the Department of Agriculture. But there were Chinese and Japanese kids working there, so nobody ever bothered us. I've been pretty lucky. I've never really been, approached or anything.
Kind of interesting, though, that when we moved here to the San Gabriel Valley, it being mostly a white-type neighborhood, I wanted my kids to have at least the opportunity to meet Japanese people. So one of the things that we did was found a church to go to that was a Japanese church. And we had been going to the Centenary Methodist Church in Los Angeles area when we were married. And so when we came out here, we looked for a Methodist church and found one in El Monte. So our kids all grew up there with at least going to a Japanese church, though they didn't keep it up, they never did. And then this community center started up at that time, so we joined the community center.
What year?
Here, this center here.
What year?
Well, you're
64, 65.
You were involved in this place opening.
Yeah, but not until after we got involved, getting our kids into judo, and they didn't like Japanese school, so we never forced them to go to Japanese school here. But even though the kids at least had opportunities to meet with the Japanese, they generally ended up sticking with the white people, even though in the schools that they went to, they were discriminated against, and there was prejudice, But it's kind of interesting that they didn't really tell us about it too much back when that happened. It wasn't until later in life that they told us that they had instances where they had were discriminated against.
In which schools?
Yeah, the schools in Covina.
Can you recall which school specifically?
Well, they started out in the schools named Badillo Grammar School, and from Badillo Grammar School they went to Ruddock
Yeah.
Intermediate or junior
Intermediate.
high. Back in those days, I guess junior high. And then they went to the older kids went to Royal Oak High School, and then the younger kids went to Charter Oak High School because Royal Oak was closed, made into a intermediate school.
All right. So I think we're just going to stop over here. We just started getting into some deeper conversations, especially about schools and Covina and racial discriminations. But obviously, I don't want to keep you here for the next 2 hours. So if y'all would like, I would love to schedule a follow-up interview just to get abstract information about the kids. The schools that your kids went through and the problems that they face as well. So before we conclude, do y'all have any questions to ask me or any last words?
No, I don't have anything.
No, the things is, I'm glad you're doing this, because so many people don't know what we went through, and it's just as a matter of history, I wish they would have explained it to a lot of kids, because our kids who went through some of it didn't know anything about why they were being, asked such questions, because they didn't realize there had been a problem. So, but in a way, I was glad, because then I realized that it was being looked into, and I was glad for that. And my kids did very well in school, huh?
Yeah, generally did well.
Yeah. They weren't called Jap or anything, were they?
Yeah, they were.
Oh.
Yeah.
They didn't tell me. But they were used to go to regular school, huh? Regular school.
Yeah, they all went to public schools.
All right. Well, thank y'all again for coming by today, and I'm really hoping that we can schedule a follow-up interview. But this is the end of this interview.
Okay.
And I'm going to go ahead and turn off the tape now. So.
Well, no, thank you very much, because